PoE 2. April 2nd, then April 4th, right next to each other, and then these two are right next to each other. I would really doubt that these dates, I would doubt that these two companies maybe pay attention to each other's dates at all.
Yeah, I doubt it.
But over here, Tencent owns 100% of Grinding Gear games. And I think they own, I don't know, 25% of Last Epoch. And according to Zizrin, they're actually aware of this. And they're launching essentially on the same day. So,
Wait, they're aware of this is in Tencent? Now that's weird, right? Because in my head, what I was thinking was that, okay, it's clear that Tencent has a much bigger stake in PoE in grinding gear games, right? And as a result, they are probably going to have care about PoE quite a bit more than Last Epoch, because at the end of the day, PoE 2 is just going to give them a lot more money. But also, Tencent is, from what I know, they just kind of let the companies do whatever. They give them the money, they ask them, make a good game, right? And then they don't really, they're kind of hands off other than that. They're not really super there to like control what they do. Now, I'm sure what happens is in their board meetings, right? They're probably a person from Tencent there at their board. And they kind of talk about stuff like that. But I'm not sure if I think to a 25% share of Last Epoch Company also, they'll probably have a seat at the board. But I'm not sure if they're really, I wasn't sure if they're really communicating like that. But according to Zizrin, they are, but I don't know where Zizrin's getting this information. I still don't believe that it's either A, what you said, right, Paul, that they're probably not trying to go against each other's interests. But in reality, what more I'm thinking is that, well, one, right? I do think regardless of whether or not PoE 2 and Last Epoch are like have investment from Tencent, I still think they're two separate entities that are competing against each other. I do. I do. Just because they have a investment from that company doesn't mean that those two companies can't be competitors. You see it all the time with like certain investors where they'll invest in one company that does like one thing and another company that does like the same thing. But at the end of the day, Tencent only owns 25% of Last Epoch and like the company and 100% of Grinding Gear Games. So I think that there's probably not that much thought going in from Tencent on the Last Epoch side. Like, I just don't think that they're as involved.
2 days apart. So we had a big discussion about it, and we seem to be have a general conclusion here that this setup really hurts Last Epoch mostly.
100%. But they probably don't care as much about that, right? If they are aware of it, they probably don't care as much about it because Last Epoch's only owned 25%.
So the people that absolutely blast PoE, and that's like their only game, they're completely unaffected by this. They don't care. They just want the PoE content to be out as soon as it's ready. So it comes out on the 4th. But I think Last Epoch is this going to hurt here. I think it's PoE being the bigger game currently. I think them going 2 days later is going to really cannibalize them.
Yep.
And then there's all these conspiracy theories about, oh, Tencent did this on purpose so Last Epoch would suffer and then they could buy out the last 75% of EHG.
Again, the thing is, they only own 25% of Last Epoch, right? They don't have a majority seat at the table. The people who are actually making the decisions are the other 75%. The people who are Tencent probably doesn't have that big of a stake at the table at Last Epoch. They really just don't. They only own 25% of it. So the majority shareholders are going to be the one who are calling the shots and making the decisions. They might be able to throw in a couple suggestions here and there, but ultimately the decision to do this was really made by the people over at Last Epoch. Now, whether or not the people at Last Epoch knew about this is another question, right? Did Tencent let them know that PoE is going to be launching their new season and their big update 2 days afterwards? I don't know. Maybe there might have been a little bit of like, oh, you know, like they're saying that, oh, maybe they want to like make it worse and like, you know, have a cheaper valuation so they can buy it easier. I think that's a stretch, but It might be a possibility. But I just don't think that's the case.
Cheaper. That was a conspiracy theory that Gazzy shared. Not the craziest idea I've ever heard. Um, but it really hurts EHG with Last Epoch and really fans of both of both of the games. The general sentiment that I was hearing from people was they'll play Last Epoch for 2 days, and when PoE content comes out, it's PoE time, and
That's
Last
exactly
Epoch
the
can
same for
just go
me.
away for all they
That's
care.
exactly the
My
thing for me.
personal opinion is I like Last Epoch. I think the game is fun. I think the game is better than most people give it credit for.
I agree.
And I would personally like to play Last Epoch for more than 2 days.
Same.
So my
I agree.
current plan, I might change it, but my current plan would be to play Last Epoch the second and the third, play PoE 2 on the fourth, and then play half and half Last Epoch and PoE 2 for the next few days until I'll probably get, I'm guessing I get bored of Last Epoch
Nah, not for
first,
me.
but we'll see how it goes. That would be my current plan. But then the next thought here is, can either of them change their dates? Well, I think PoE 2 definitely knew Last Epoch's date ahead of time.
Yep.
So if they wanted to change their date,
They're not going
they
to.
wouldn't have picked the
Yeah,
fourth.
exactly. They wouldn't
So
have.
I think PoE 2 is set in stone that they're going on the fourth. So then it's up to Last Epoch. What do they want to do?
I don't think that changing the date will make a difference unless they're pushing it out by a month, which at that point, it's totally going to kill the hype. It is totally going to kill the hype. And even a month out, I think there's going to be still a lot of people still playing the new PoE 2 League, which is probably going to be including me. Though actually, I might want to be playing some of this too. No Rest for the Wicked. But I don't think that's going to happen.
One thing that's very difficult to move around, or at least to set up administratively, is Twitch drops. So I think that
Oh,
they've
yeah,
already
yeah, yeah. Just like what you're saying, Shadow.
nailed that down with Twitch to have the Twitch drops start on April 2nd. I don't know, maybe they could move that, but that might add like a difficulty here. And maybe Last Epoch just doesn't want to deal with it. Maybe they say, we're not moving again. I know that they've moved their dates for other games in the past, and maybe they're getting sick of being pushed around. I'm really not sure. But especially since they're both owned by Tencent, I would personally, as an AR,
Again, if they're not owned, that's the thing, right? I think people have such a fixation on this owned by Tencent when they're not owned by Tencent. PoE 2, GGG is owned by Tencent. Last Epoch's company, EHG or whatever, is not owned by Tencent. They have a 25% share in it, but they are not the majority shareholder. They have an invested interest in how well Last Epoch does, but they don't own the company. And as a result, they don't get to call the shots. It is a lot. They're not saying it's not a lot, but they're probably not the majority shareholder. I'm assuming the CEO is probably still the majority shareholder. Yeah, I mean, if this is accurate, right, it looks like their one and only investor is Tencent. And if that's the case, Tencent owns 25% of the company, and the CEO owns the other 75%, or the founders, the co-founders, whoever it might be, right? Founder and CEO. So Judd Cobbler, right? So he is the other person that owns the company. So if this information is correct, and there's only one investor and it's Tencent, that means Tencent owns 25% of the company, and the CEO, Judd Cobbler, owns the other 75%, which means that Tencent does not really, the person who is calling the last shot, the final call, is this guy. I do think that they are still competitors. PoE 2 and Last Epoch are definitely still competitors, and they're not owned by Tencent. Again, they're not both owned by Tencent. Last Epoch, PoE 2 GG is owned by Tencent. Last Epoch, EGH or whatever, is not owned. Can investors invest in two companies that are competitors? Yes, investors can invest in two companies that are competitors. However, a few consideration: conflict of interest. If the investor holds a significant stakes or has a role in both companies, there might be potential conflict of interest. For example, exactly, right? So right here, think about it this way, right? So if the investor holds a significant stake or has a role in both companies, there might be potential conflict of interest, which would not be allowed. That would be illegal, basically, right? And that they would not allow for that to happen. But that's why Tencent will probably never have a majority share in like that in 11th hour games for that reason, right? Ethical dramas, prioritizing one company over another, right? That's not going to happen unless I think if they own both companies, then they're just going to merge the two companies.